April 2nd, 2019 regular meeting of Chatham County Savannah Metropolitan Planning Commission will now come to order. Please stand for the invocation and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Dear Father, our God, we ask that you guide us as we make decisions for our community. We ask that you give us the wisdom to moderate justice with our decisions. This we ask, amen. Amen. Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. There's a sign-in sheet at the door of the hearing room. Please sign the sheet to record your attendance at today's hearing. For those of you who would like to speak, they have blue speaker cards out front. Please sign one and hand it to the lady at the table in front of me. The agenda is on the table outside next to the hearing room. I would suggest you get one and take a look at it. Today's agenda is broken down into several parts. First, notices, proclamations, and acknowledgments. Next, the consent agenda, which consists of items which the applicant is in agreement and staff recommends. There are no known objections for staff. The outline in which the meeting will be conducted. A report will be presented by staff to the board providing information on the petition. After the staff presentation, board members can ask questions of staff regarding the presentation for clarification. The petitioner is then offered an opportunity to make a presentation regarding his petition to the commission. The board will then ask questions of the petition for clarification. Afterwards, the floor will be open for public comment. Afterwards, the board will then take a vote. First item on our agenda is the approval of the agenda. Second. It's been properly moved by Mr. Coles and second by Ms. Parker for the approval of the agenda. Any discussion? Any unreadiness? We're ready to take the vote. Matter passes. Item 4, notices, proclamations, and acknowledgement. April 23rd, 2019, regular meeting of the MPC will be held here at 1:30 in this same building. Information, Ms. Wilson, you have to introduce us to some new staff members.
Yes, I want to take the opportunity to introduce 3 new staff members. Hopefully everybody is here. First, we have Ryan Charles, who comes to us from SCAD by way of Tennessee. And he is the cultural resource planner. He'll be working with the historic preservation staff. We've got John Kidd. Hopefully he is here. Hi, John. He is a Georgia guy, but moved here from Oregon, and is the GIS specialist working with SAGES. So welcome. And then we've got Kate Morano, who is a comprehensive planner, special projects, and she will be working with me and the other staff on projects. She comes from UGA by way of Georgia Tech, by way of Virginia Tech. So welcome, and thank you for letting me acknowledge them.
Welcome aboard, your staff. Item 5, items requested to be removed from the final agenda. Item number 4, new construction. Anyone here to speak on item number 4? I do not have a speaker card, but anyone to speak on item number 4? Mr. Loxton, is that matter coming back before us on the 23rd?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And also another item, item number 5, rezoning map amendment, 7201 Van Buren Avenue. I do have a card for that. Ms. Lina, that matter is that coming back on April 23rd as well, Mr. Loxton? Ma'am, if you would be back on April 23rd at 1:30, that matter will come back up. Thank you. The chair will entertain a motion for items number 4 and number 5 to remove from the agenda. It's been properly moved by Mr. Coles.
Second.
Properly second. Any discussion? Any unreadiness? We are ready to take a vote. Matter passes. Item number 6, items request to be withdrawn, which is rezoning map amendment. Mr. Lotz, it's my understanding this matter will not return before us. Is that correct? That being so, I will not take a vote on this since it's been withdrawn. Okay. Item number 7 is our consent agenda. Approval of the March 12, 2019 briefing and regular meeting minutes. Chair will entertain a motion.
So moved.
It's been properly moved.
Second.
And second. Any discussion? Any unreadiness? We're ready to take the vote. Matters approved. We have no old business, but we have regular business. Item number 8. Mr. Lotson and Ms. Liddy. I will remind our commissioners that this matter is coming back before us for clarification of several items that have been presented. It is my understanding that the city hired Attorney Frank Jenkins, if I'm not mistaken, to vet the matter, and he's taken a look at it and has approved it at this point. So this is merely a matter for recommendation for the board. You may proceed, Mr. Lotson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before we go into the presentation, just for the public here and the board members, as you mentioned, when we heard this item previously, approximately a month ago, or had a presentation to the board approximately a month ago, there were a number of questions and comments that came both from the public that were here at the time, as well as from members of the Planning Commission. Our charge at that time from you was to go back, revisit those questions and comments, come back with responses to those. So in that time period between the last meeting and today, Ms. Liddy and I have met with a number of people who were here at that time to talk about their comments and questions, hopefully get some of those answered. So I think what we have for you today is a response to the comments and questions that came up. Also, we'll talk a little bit about the process going forward from here. And also, we want to talk a little bit about some things that we know that will linger beyond the Planning Commission's action and even City Council's action later this year. Things that the city has identified that need to be worked on moving forward, but outside of the official NUZO process. So there are a few of those things too that we'll talk about today that came up during our meeting. But we want to keep it mostly to the comments that came before us, came from you all and from the public. So what we'll go over today are those comments from the hearing in February. We'll also talk about the fact that there, as you mentioned, has been a legal review by Attorney Jenkins, and he's provided a draft resolution for the city. I say draft because we believe that one of the things that is likely to take place as this moves through the city's hearing process is that if changes are made, once this document goes to the city in those public hearing processes, then they will amend it as necessary prior to taking an action on it. So everything that we do today, potentially there can be changes to it should the mayor and aldermen deem it necessary. And if those changes are made, they'll be reflected in the document and in the resolution prior to its adoption. So we'll be going through that and then give you our recommendation for today. So as we'll move through here, and I'm going to let Bridget talk a little bit about some of the things that got changed in Article 3, which is sort of the meat and potatoes, if you will, of the ordinance. We spent a lot of time with a lot of individuals talking about this section over the last month, and we think we've clarified the questions and concerns that came up during our last hearing.
Yes, so good afternoon. Bridget Liddy from the Department of Planning and Urban Design with the City of Savannah. Thank you so much for having us here this afternoon. As far as Article 3 go, Marcus mentioned that was kind of like the meat and potatoes of our application and processes that we have. A lot of questions, a lot of concerns. The way I describe it is kind of you're trying to comb your hair and you can't comb your hair because you've got so many knots in it. And what we've done is we've really sat down, we looked at it, we looked at our processes at the city, we looked at MPC's processes, and listened to stakeholders that were out there in order to come up with a stronger Article 3 that we feel encapsulates what we needed to change. And the first thing was making sure it's very subtle, but a very important distinction between what a meeting was and a public hearing. We are currently in a public hearing. When we go to the city council, we are in a public hearing. When we talk about meetings, we're talking about neighborhood meetings. Those are something that is not official. There's no technically public record like we have here or when we're going in front of city council. That was a very important distinction to make. And when applications are considered, one thing that we had failed to mention is that it could be continued to the next public hearing or a date certain. That's something that we did not include in the language, which we do, or you all do, frequently, as well as mayor and council. So we added that language when there was an approval process. In addition to that, there were some questions about the comprehensive plan portion. It was a very long process that had to go, that was articulated in the previous draft. And what we've done is we've kind of taken that out and referred to state code and referred to it saying that every 5 years that comp plan is updated. And that's when we incorporate those amendments into the process. We also went through and clarified when neighborhood meetings were actually needed. In some areas, we didn't make the change. Well, in other areas, we didn't have the neighborhood requirement for the meeting. So we went ahead and cleaned that up. And then we went through Article 12 with the special exceptions and actually combined that with the special use permits and variances, if I'm not mistaken. Any questions about this portion of Article 3 so far? Another huge concern, quite a bit of comments that came up had to do with the Historic Preservation Commission. That's covered in Article 2.5. And the concern is we are looking at creating a brand new Historic Preservation Commission, specifically for the locally designated historic districts, Streetcar, Victorian, Tyler Brownsville, and actually Ardsley Park now that they have a conservation district. So this board will be reviewing any kind of development or demolitions associated with those 4 landmark districts. The landmark historic district will be considered by the Historic District Review Board. There was a concern about the composition of this particular body being the members of the Planning Commission that are appointed by the city. There's a lot of pushback from the community and people scratching their heads and saying, like, why are we burdening the Planning Commission with reviewing historic preservation activities in these other 4 locally designated districts? And so what we've done is we've retooled the language to actually have mayor and council appoint 9 members of a new commission, which is something that when the audience members came up and spoke at the last meeting in February, that's what their desire was. And we went back and we made that adjustment. In addition to that, a key feature of this particular section is we added a line that said mayor and council can go ahead and create this particular board. Because in the previous iterations of ordinances, these boards have already been established. And so we wanted to make sure to have mayor and council first establish those boards. In looking throughout all of the boards and commissions in Article 2, keep in mind that once we get NUZO to another level, i.e. as we get it to mayor and council, one of the things that we're going to be doing on the city working with MPC is reviewing all the bylaws and updating them. When you call clerk of council's office right now, I can get a copy of bylaws from like 1985, when in fact they might have been updated since then. So we really need to go through there and clean that up. And that's something that we're going to be doing as part of this process. And with this particular commission, we will be working with local stakeholders to get an idea together as far as what the composition of that commission should be, and go ahead and make that recommendation formally to mayor and council. And mayor and council can go ahead and determine what the composition is going to be based on our recommendation. Any questions about this? There's another issue talking about the boards and commissions in Article 2. There was a line in there that said there was a concern about one member, only one member, at least one member being a resident of the historic overlay district. That language has been removed. Once again, that will be covered in the bylaws section. In addition to that, the State Preservation Office actually flagged that as an issue. So that has since been removed. Yeah, you go for it.
And let me just add one more comment to that before we move to the next section. But the critical thing, in my opinion, to remember about most of what Bridget just talked about is the fact that all the boards that the city appoints are appointed in the same manner that we're recommending now. You know, we were recommending a different process previously. So this will be more consistent with the way boards are formed, being established by the mayor and aldermen. Another thing that we had to take a close look at is the completeness issue. There's a section in the ordinance that talks about when applications are considered complete and filed. What we've done is we made a revision that basically says that the city manager or their designee can determine the completeness of applications before they come to the planning commission. So for example, and this is something that we've already started to just institute on a policy level, when things are submitted to the city, oftentimes, you know, they go to the city and then they come directly to us. And they haven't really been vetted for completeness until we get it. So because we're on a timeline in terms of getting things advertised, getting things out to the public, oftentimes we'll receive something several days after it's been submitted, and then we find out it's not complete. And then we've got to notify the applicant, you know, that they've left something out, and it often kicks things back to another meeting. So what the city's agreed to do now is to establish the completeness at the time they receive an application before they send it to us. So when we receive it, we know that it's got all the information that it needs in it, and we can move forward with it in terms of bringing it before the planning commission. This is something that will still be done within our normal timeline of review, so it doesn't cause the applicants any additional time in the review process. So that was an issue that came up by some of the folks that frequently bring petitions before you, and we feel like this is a solution to that particular issue.
And a great example, I'll just chime in. You had a petition that came in front of you at the last meeting for Alaska Street, Alaska Avenue. And there were some questions that came up about, well, were there issues with this person not being compliant or getting compliance with existing code? Was there an issue with them getting cited? And unfortunately, we didn't have that information available. But when we do our completeness review, we at the city go through all of our databases and see if there are any kind of outstanding issues and include that information as we send over the application to MPC, so you all have the most complete information as possible as we're reviewing it.
The next section is regarding the neighborhood notification piece. This is something that certainly board members and others were very passionate about in terms of bringing this into the ordinance. It's not something that we require now. Officially, this board in particular has always requested of applicants that they get involved with the neighborhoods prior to applying for something that, you know, may be controversial. This section of the ordinance lays out how a neighborhood meeting can take place or shall take place when it's required, and what is required of the applicant in terms of notification. One of the things that came up in discussing this particular section with some of the frequent applicants is that they wanted to be sure, as well as if we do our due diligence, is our meeting, are we being considered in terms of having met the criteria? So we did bake in language that says if the applicant meets the criteria for notification, regardless of whether the neighborhood chooses to meet or not, then their application will be considered complete and we will review it. But in the event that there is a neighborhood meeting held, we've laid out exactly when they need to notify us so that our staff can be present, when they need to notify the neighborhood, and the time frames in which those meetings will take place. This is just to ensure that an applicant who is holding a neighborhood meeting does it in good faith, and that staff can be present to ensure that that took place.
And I think the language that we worked on, I feel much more comfortable with it. I think Marcus does too. It's just clear as far as what the requirements are.
The next section that we did some revisions to are the plan development section and special purpose district. You're smiling. You want to talk about that?
This is our favorite section.
Sure.
So what we did is we went back and we looked at 3.6, which has to do with plan developments, and then we looked at special purpose district 6.1. This was a pretty important, two important chapters and sections that were of concern that we really had to roll up our sleeves and dive into. And what we ended up doing was taking all of the information from the plan developments in 3.6 and actually combine it in Article 6, where it's much clearer. Everything is found in one chapter. And then going through that particular section, we addressed discrepancies between large-scale and small-scale plan developments. I think there was one comment that we had at the last meeting about large-scale developments. I think there was some confusion with the plan development districts, and then what we have is large-scale development in the context of overlay for the historic district. So we were able to address those issues, and then just really added more specificity as far as where there was in it some ambiguity with some of the language that we had that we were able to type that.
In section 3.7, there was the concern about the process for zoning that included the Historic District Board of Review, Historic Preservation Commission being within the review process for a zoning action. There was a lot of discussion about that because the current process, as y'all know, is it comes before the Planning Commission, a recommendation is forwarded to the mayor and alderman, and they make a ruling. In the previous iteration of NUZO, that process included the historic districts when the petition was within a district. So that would have really created a longer process for an applicant. Even if things are done concurrently, the meetings don't fall exactly the same time. So it was another layer, if you will, of review for a zoning action that was taking place within a historic district that we felt like really wasn't necessary. We did agree that was not necessary, that the Planning Commission review on to City Council is adequate in terms of the review process for zoning. So we essentially eliminated that portion that we had written that included the Historic Preservation Commission and or review board to be involved and in the loop on a zoning action that was within a historic district.
So this was another fun little piece that we had to work on, and it was something that was also flagged by the State Preservation Office as something that needed to be tweaked. And the tweaks that we made were consistent with the recommendations that they had. Originally, when we talked about interim protection for the historic district designation, this is in the event that a neighborhood, perhaps Parkside, that just recently came through here, wanted to go ahead and locally provide a local designation for their neighborhood or historic district. In doing that, the way NUZO is currently structured, or was currently structured, is that once a neighborhood came in and submitted that application to the planning director would review it, determine it to be complete. Once it's complete, an interim protection would occur within the boundaries of that historic district. And that was a power that the planning director had. What we've done is we've modified that, and we said once the application's done, the planning director will make a recommendation to mayor and council, where mayor and council will go ahead and have a resolution for a temporary stay for that interim protection for a period of up to 1 year, or until the actual designation application is done and complete and brought to you all and then to mayor and council. So we felt very confident that that was a much stronger approach because it allowed more individuals to be involved with the process in the event that they were concerned about the interim protection getting kicked in. And with the interim protection, it's primarily following the Secretary of Interior's standards for rehabilitation. And so that was something that we worked on. In addition to that, we added language that said if an individual property owner or applicant had an application in the pipeline, that application could indeed continue to go through the pipeline. And in fact, that interim protection was placed by mayor and council.
Next, we had comments regarding the Savannah Hilton Head International Airport in the airport overlay section. This is a section that we believe will continue to expand. The airport has questions and concerns regarding the radius around the airport, what can be developed within that radius, particularly as it relates to flight path, concerns regarding height and what can be allowed, types of uses that will be allowed, etc. They are and have provided many comments and been very helpful in this review process. We did create a section in the ordinance that will allow us to add additional sections regarding the airport overlay. Ms. Wilson has met directly with the airport leadership, and we believe that there will be a greater sort of separate public process for the expansion of the airport overlay in the future. So we've accommodated that in the new zoning ordinance. And so now I think we'll go and start talking about some of the other sort of general comments that came up during the hearing and where we are with those. These are some of these things that we're talking about now are really sort of policy decisions that have to be made at the mayor and alderman level. Sort of the way we do things now versus the way, a better way we might do them in the future. One of those things is grandfathering, which in particularly related to parking. This is a issue that often comes up, particularly in the downtown area, where you have a use that has been gone for some period of time. Another use comes into an existing building. How do you address the parking for this new use? The way we address it now, or part of the way we address it now, is that some number of spaces is, quote, grandfathered because it was the number of spaces that first use would have needed. So when the second use comes in, they essentially have a credit. That's great for the second use coming in terms of meeting their parking requirement, but it's not always great for people who have to deal with the on-street access of parking in those areas. So we know, I think everybody understands the parking issue. We've spent a lot of time over the last few years discussing parking, particularly in downtown Savannah. But this is one of those things that a decision will have to be made regarding how we want to treat it. And that's not a decision that really is made in NUZO, but that's kind of a separate discussion. I know Bridget's office fields questions on a daily basis regarding this particular issue. But it is something that is on the list of things to do pursuant to or outside of the NUZO process.
It also ties into the study that the city of Savannah adopted, the Parking Matters study that was done. And so it's a much larger discussion that needs to happen while we're implementing the Parking Matters recommendations.
We also received a number of comments from Scenic Chatham. A lot of these were related to signage, beautification, greenscapes, etc., landscaping, the issues of billboards, which we've talked about a lot at this board. We've got fairly, I think, clear and robust standards for billboards now. Scenic Chatham is recommending that no new billboards be permitted. This is probably just on its own an issue that you could put a committee together to discuss and come back with recommendations for the county regarding billboards, both in historic districts and in other places. They brought up a number of issues regarding signage in general. I think our sign section in the NUZO, as it stands, is a great improvement over what we have now. We generally are allowing less square footage and less height than we do under the current regulation. Signage is always a challenge because the business community wants more signs, bigger signs. The other folks want fewer signs and shorter signs. So we think we've got have identified that is an issue to consider moving forward, and we think we've got a good foundation with the sign section as it's written now.
So not a lot of other issues that came up with Scenic Chatham. Two others had to do with, I'm sure you might have seen the truck driving around with the digital imaging on it. That's something that the city is looking at, which will be separate from NUZO in reference to the possibility of creating an ordinance for that. In addition to that, there were concerns about the banners, balloons, and extra displays that are permitted along, the auto dealership area and other businesses that want to attract attention for a specific sale or just to attract attention to their business. And this is something that is handled administratively with the city of Savannah through our zoning process. And so we'll take a look at that as NewZo moves forward.
Another issue that came up during our last meeting were rooming houses, boarding houses, group homes. This is something that the city has decided will be addressed outside of NewZo. I believe there's going to be an upcoming workshop for the mayor and aldermen. The uses, rooming houses and group homes are permitted in various zoning districts. I think most of what has created an issue are really related to things related to enforcement, not necessarily to rooming houses and group homes in general. But this is something that they've tasked staff with coming back with a presentation to the mayor and aldermen on, so that they can make a policy decision related to these particular uses. As you know, and this is something that is not on this list today, but similarly with convenience stores, there's been a lot of discussion with the mayor and aldermen regarding whether or not there'll be some limitations on those uses, some separation requirements, or other conditions to be placed thereupon, and they're treating these particular uses similarly. So with that, you see that there is a proposed resolution attached to your agenda. This is the adopting resolution that's been drafted by the city's consultant attorney. That is what, if you take action today, will move to the mayor and aldermen. As I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, it may be changed before the time it's actually adopted, depending on the outcome of the hearings that take place at City Council. So our updated timeline is as shown here. If the Planning Commission moves us forward today, the first council zoning hearing will be on April 25th, and then subsequent hearings at a minimum on May 9th and May 23rd. And with that, I'll answer any questions of the board.
Commissioners, any questions? There being none, thank you.
Thank you.
I see I have someone walking up with a speaker card. I want to make an announcement before I start. I want to make this very clear to members of the public who are here. This board, this commission is to make a recommendation only. Let me say that again. A recommendation only. This is not a final say-so on NewZo. NewZo will leave us if it is passed, and will go to City Council. You will have an opportunity on April 25th to state whatever statements you wish to make to your council members. In fact, I would advise you that if you have a comment, which I have now 6 comment cards, that if you have something you wish to state, you should state it directly to your alderman, the mayor, or all of them, if you have a concern about NewZo. Now, having said that, this meeting was advertised as an opportunity to make a comment. And these 6 speaker cards that I have in front of me, I am going to call you, and you are to make just that, a comment. After 2 minutes, you will be excused from that point at the podium. The first speaker card I have is Steve Argue. Sir, you have 2 minutes. State your name for the record.
Steve Argue. My comment is about Article 2, which I still find to be in violation of state law. Specifically, the state law says anytime an historic district is enacted by ordinance by the city, they have to have a historical preservation commission. In 1987, the Victorian district was created. 1999, Cuyler-Brownsville district was created. 2005, the Thomas Square Streetcar Historic District was created. None of those are being represented by an historical preservation commission. Now, what's being attempted by Article 2 is to combine them, whereas historically, they should all be separate. The state law is very clear that each of them have to be represented. In addition, Article 2, the revised one, has what would be called discretionary input by the mayor and aldermen. In other words, they are allowed to not have the requirements that the state law mandates, which means that they have to reside in the historic districts and they have to have a certain composition of special interest in history or preservation. That's not what's written in Article 2 currently. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Argue. I have another speaker card. You have 2 minutes. I have a Mr. Long. Please state your name for the record, and sir, you have exactly 2 minutes from the second you state your name.
My name is Brinker Long. I'm speaking on behalf of Southern Pine Company regarding Nuzo. So right now we're being changed from IL to TC1. So this takes away things like warehousing and light manufacturing. If we go to TC1 or TC2 even, zoning is meant to preserve the character of the existing neighborhood, and it's changing so that we can no longer operate as the business as it exists today. I'm proposing that ILT, which is a new designation, be what y'all go with on this instead of TC1. It will open up the new opportunities that y'all are looking for in TC1, as well as allow us to continue operating as we do today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Long. Next speaker card I have is Mr. Michael Ambrose. Sir, please state your name, and you have 2 minutes from the moment you state your name.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Ambrose, and I'm representing the Victorian Neighborhood Association. At the last 2 meetings of the Victorian Neighborhood Association, we've discussed this thoroughly, and the vast majority of the people present at our meetings endorsed the proposal and endorsed the amendments that have been included with the most recent draft.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
I have a speaker card for Mr. Jahar. Did I pronounce that name correct? Ms. Jahar, I'm sorry. If you would please state your name for the record, and ma'am, you have 2 minutes from the second you state your name.
I am Salam Jahar. I represent the families and 5 generations of Savannah born and raised families, and I'm new to Savannah physically living here, but my parents were born and raised here. My husband and I recently purchased a property in District 2, Zone 2, between 34th and 35th in that area, and we're very concerned about the news that was brought to us by our neighboring Southern Pine, whereas there's a great possibility that a packing house or nightclub or liquor stores and other types of industries may be coming up in the area that we just purchased and intend to bring our family back to. Our parents were born and raised here. We have 352 living relatives, and our grandparents were part of the building of Savannah. Individual small communities are very important. We talk about tourism in Savannah, but Savannah has to remember it's not just about bringing money in, it's about sustaining the very historic values that make Savannah great. It's not just about money coming in, but when people come in and they do tours or walking tours, they're also very interested in what's going on in the communities and the families. My parents would like to come back to Savannah, and that's why my husband and I purchased a new property in that area. And the very thought of bringing up packing stores and nightclubs and other types of industries that don't necessarily reflect the community are very detrimental to the very communities that have been born and bred in Savannah for the past several hundred years. So we're very concerned about what's coming in, and want your team to remember that there's value in families and community, and we have to remember the influence of children. Thank you,
ma'am. I have another speaker card for Mr. Bob Rosenwald. Sir, after you state your name, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Bob Rosenwald. I represent the Downtown Neighborhood Association. I was here, and we've been here several times. A lot of very worthy comments today. The staff obviously has worked very hard to make this document even better than it was. This is never going to be a living document until it gets life. And it's been around for 10 years. There's been and new people come in and new people start looking at it, it's you can have these hearings forever. Now, I realize there's a lot beyond the Downtown Neighborhood Association area that's covered by this, and we understand that. But we need some certainty. This at least is the beginning of that certainty. There's been a great deal of effort to make this the best it can possibly be, but it will be, once it's passed, a living document that is going to be open for review and alteration and whatnot. But it won't be there until we get going with it. So I urge you strongly to approve this and send it forward to council for their review and hopefully approval. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I have a speaker card for a Frederica. I cannot make. Sorry, ma'am. Tahaka. I'm sorry. Mr. Hawker. Ms. Tahaka, you have 2 minutes after you state your name on the record.
Thank you, sir. My name is Frederica Chapman Taharka. I reside at 1807 Reynolds Street, which is in the 2nd District. Born and raised, and when I say born, I was born at 1807 Reynolds Street in 1950. And I echo the comments that the young lady gave before. I'm totally opposed to the rezoning. We have a lot of positive things going on in our area, even though there are a lot of homes that have, because of generations, have either been lost to fire or other damages. We don't look forward to this rezoning at all. We are impressed with the things that are going on at Southern Pine, along with the number of the neighborhood activities that are going on now, and I don't feel as though the rezoning would be beneficial to our neighborhood.
Thank you, ma'am. I have another speaker card for Mr. Ramsey Khalid. You have 2 minutes, sir, from the moment you state your name.
Ramsey Khalid, Mr. Chairman, members. Briefly, the NUZO is moving, and we are going to endorse it, with the exception of one of the spot changes that has happened to our property to full city block. I'm just going to read real quickly what's going to be allowed that is not allowed in an IO. It's very brief. If you look at page 1, is that when I start?
You may continue.
Single family all the way through apartments are now going to be allowed where they're not allowed in an IO. You're going to allow dormitories, student housing, fraternity and sorority houses, rooming houses, single family occupancy houses. This is not allowed in an IL or an ILT, but is allowed in the NUZO. Museums, I'm not going to do a museum. We spent a lifetime developing the property. If we lose the zone, we also lose our careers. And if some of you are 68 years old, you might be. Child care, 24-hour. So to bring a 24-hour service, whether it's a club or a package shop, healthcare facilities, but the big ones, I'll go right to the death blow. Besides,
43 seconds left. Sir.
Indoor amusement, and you can now allow. If you go to page 5313, you're going to allow, which is not package shops, of course, but I thought it was 3 minutes. Short-term vacation rentals are going to be allowed at 34th and East Broad. None of us are in the short-term rental, and you will give a death blow to a very historic structure. We are endorsing NUZO, but don't downgrade something that we purchased and have been an operating light industrial building since 1923. You're also going to allow bed and breakfasts and homestay bed and breakfasts. You're going to extend the hours on the street past 6 o'clock. We're all neighbors.
Thank you, sir. 2 minutes up.
Until light industrial goes home at 6 o'clock.
2 minutes up, sir.
I thought it was going to be 3 minutes.
I said 2.
Nice. I you said, but I thought it was 3.
Mr. Carey, I have a speaker card for you, sir. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. Daniel Carey with Historic Savannah Foundation. I want to thank and congratulate Marcus and Bridget for the work they've done since this was last before us. And my comment is really just a question, and that is concerning the Preservation Commission and the appointment by the City Council.
I'm going to caution you. So you have a question. We're open for comments only.
My comment, okay, I think I can phrase it in the way of a comment. Thank you, sir. My comment would be, let's make certain that City Council is ready and prepared to nominate and appoint those 9 members of the commission so that coincides with the passage. The commission needs to be ready, needs to be certified, needs to be representative and composed of the right kinds of individuals with the qualifications and so on to do that. So I just wanted to be certain, I didn't hear it in the presentation, that in fact would be ready and coincide with when this would be adopted and come into effect. So I would be happy to be part of that if I can help move that along so that we can achieve that goal.
Thank you, Mr. Carey. Chair will entertain a motion from the commissioners. Motion to approve staff recommendation. Second. Properly moved by Mr. Woody and second by Mr. Cole. Any discussion? Any unreadiness? We're ready to take the vote. Motion carries. Next item on our agenda is item number 9, Master Plan Amendment, Berwick Plantation. Mr. Lyson. Just go back.
Hey, Bridget.
I think he did have a legitimate concern.
He did.
Yeah.
But like you said, it goes to city council.
They handle it. Right. Took 10 years. We've done our part.
15.
Huh?
It's been 15.
It's been 15. Took 15 years.
I'm thinking it was 15.
Long time.
But you know, they quit for a while. They quit for 3 years.
You don't know him?
Yeah.
When the county got out. So they quit for 3 years when the county got out.
Order. Lyson.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. The next item on the agenda is a request to amend the master plan. This is related to the Berwick Master Plan, a planned community located on the west side of Highway 17. This tax map shows the parcel that we're discussing today in particular. It's approximately 12 acres. The current master plan or land use designation is for a church. The petitioner is requesting that that land use designation be changed from church to congregate care. This is an aerial map of the property. This is Berwick Boulevard along the western border of the property. And Highway 17 is just south of this off the map here. The Berwick Master Plan, which you see here, was originally adopted in November of 2000. There's been a number of amendments to this plan over the years. Most recently, there was an amendment in this area that created a designation for multifamily residential. Most of the residential property at this point within the boundaries of the Berwick PUD are developed. There are a few pieces on the far southern end that are commercially designated that have not developed yet, but for the most part, all the residential is built out. The petitioner, as I mentioned, is proposing that this site right here be designated as congregate care. Congregate care includes memory care for seniors as well as assisted and independent living. We've seen a proliferation of this particular use throughout the county, and proliferation is probably a strong word, but it is a great need, and we've seen a number of these developments coming up in various portions of Chatham County over the last 3 to 5 years, and it continues to be a need to provide housing for retirees as well as folks who need assistance. And within neighborhoods, we found are really the appropriate places for a congregate care facility. They tend to blend well, in my opinion, within existing neighborhoods. This tract of land that is being proposed by the applicant to change, as I mentioned, is approximately 12 acres. The current church designation was established at the time the original master plan was done. However, immediately across Berwick Boulevard, a church has been established on this property. Property is currently owned by Church of God out of Cleveland, Tennessee, and the petitioner has the property under contract for the purpose of developing a congregate care facility. I should mention that this portion of the consideration is only related to the land use change. The petitioner, of course, intends to develop a facility, but that development process will be a separate review from this land use process. At this time, they've proposed 83 independent living units, 48 assisted living units, and 24 memory care units. But these are issues that will be vetted at the time a development plan comes before the Planning Commission. We are recommending approval of the land use change to go from church to congregate care facility. We are recommending that approval include a number of conditions that are attached to the staff report. These include, most importantly, the buffer requirements for the areas that abut residential. We're proposing a 40-foot buffer, which is common along Berwick Boulevard. That's common throughout the PUD. We're proposing a 20-foot buffer width along the canal right-of-way. This canal right-of-way is 60 feet in width. So there's already a 30-foot buffer on either side of the canal. So we're proposing 20 feet there. And we're also proposing a 25-foot buffer along the northern and eastern side adjacent to the residential, where buildings are no more than 2 stories. In the event buildings are proposed to be larger than 2 stories, we're proposing an additional buffer up to 50 feet as determined by the Planning Commission. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions. The petitioner's representatives are also here to make a presentation.
Questions of Mr. Lotson? Yes, Ms. Jarrett.
I was just curious, why are we requiring a bigger buffer along the roadway than we are along the residential area?
Actually, within the Berwick PUD, 40-foot buffers along Berwick Boulevard are common throughout the master plan. So that's why we noted that in the report.
Any additional questions, Ms. Southers?
I have a question. Are you requiring anything other than landscape buffers along the waterways and possibly the pond? If you're going to propose memory care, don't you want to protect these individuals from water?
I'm not sure I'm following your question. Is this, are you talking about specific to the canal?
The canal, and then I'm also concerned there's a large pond on the property.
Mm-hmm. And because we haven't seen a development plan yet, I mean, that is something that would be vetted at that time. That would be a consideration, you know, how the property would be secured.
Thank you.
Any additional questions of Mr. Lotson? Petitioner is present. If you would, sir, please step forward and state your name for the record.
This one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Harold Yellen for the petitioner Flournoy Development Group. And with me today is Mr. Ryan Smith, who is the project engineer. Also here today is our representatives of the Church of God, Cleveland, Tennessee. The church owns this piece of property and this piece of property, and it's only this piece of property which is before you today. And on behalf of the church, we have Reverend Alton Carter and also Mr. Danny Falligan, and we're all here to answer any questions that y'all may have. As I think you know, a change of use in Berwick Plantation is accomplished as an amendment to a master development plan. Previously, this property was designated as a church or as a school. And based on that 12 acres, there could be a very large church or a very large school. By comparison to Savannah High, there could have been as many as perhaps 500 students at this location. What we are proposing and the changes we've made appear here as church site. We've identified a new color, and it's hard to see the footnote, but we're asking that this property now be changed to congregant care. And congregant care is the Chatham County term for what we're trying to accomplish here. And then I think the only other change is adding that purple color. Sometimes the colors do tend to merge together. As Mr. Watson mentioned to you, our plans do call for approximately 83 independent living units, 48 assisted living units, and 24 memory care, which will be located as far away from the pond as possible, but also it's self-contained. Our memory care people do not have access to the outside of the property. They will be, I don't want to call it lockdown, but they will not have the ability to leave the building. By most standards, this is a relatively small congregant care facility. We are very excited about this project. We think this is the right use, and we think this is the right location for this use. We do agree 100% with staff recommendation for approval. So Mr. Falligan, Reverend Carter, and I, along with Ryan Smith, we're happy to answer any questions that y'all may have, and I apologize for my voice.
Mr. Yellen.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Yellen, traffic. That area is heavily traveled, and since they have added a Starbucks, they've added a Little Caesar. There's another restaurant over there they've added. Traffic has become almost impossible to traverse in that area. And as I understand, that area has pretty much one way in and one way out for the most part for the residents in that neighborhood. Are we doing a traffic study with this as well?
We specifically met with staff prior to coming before you today, and there was no need for a traffic impact analysis because the traffic associated with this use is considerably less than what it would be for a school, and probably about the same as a church. A church, of course, contributes traffic typically on Wednesdays and Sundays, but it was felt by staff that there was no need to do a traffic study because of the use itself is considered to be a low volume generator of traffic.
How many beds in this particular facility you're talking about? How many staff members?
I don't know the exact number of staff members. I just know the numbers of units themselves. Obviously, the memory care folks do not have cars at all.
They don't. Staff will.
They will. The 48 assisted living, most do not have cars. Only the independent living folks typically would have their own cars. They're in the nature of houses or apartments. There'll be cottages on the grounds themselves. So based on our conversations, I'm not going to tell you there'll be no traffic. The only way to have no traffic is to not develop the site at all. But currently, whether it be a subdivision like the one that appears here, retail like this one, or townhomes like this, whatever we put on there is going to put more traffic. There's just no question about that. I won't say anything otherwise, but we're pleased that we are certainly by definition or by most standards a low volume traffic generator as a congregate care.
Mr. Lotson, I have a quick question for you before I. Any plans to open up the roadway at all in that area?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Any plans to open up the roads in that area? Because that's a very narrow road as you travel down Berwick.
Are you talking specifically Berwick Boulevard?
Correct.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any plans to widen Berwick Boulevard. I know that there's significant traffic on Berwick Boulevard itself because of the number of households it serves. It was our opinion that this particular use, in terms of being a traffic generator, was fairly low. There are much more intense uses to the south of here, including the, if you even take the 12 roughly acres and develop it residentially, it creates a lot more traffic, than congregate care. So we felt like this was one of the uses that would have less of a burden on traffic than other things that could potentially go here.
Thank you, Ms. Jarrett. I believe you have a question.
I was just going to ask about the development. Are there other access points in this development, or does everybody just dump out onto Berwick Boulevard?
Really, it's a large area. PUD. I mean, Berwick is the primary spine road for the development through here. There are many streets that come off of it. But in terms of getting to Highway 17, as an example, if you're anywhere probably mid PUD going south, you're going to use Berwick Boulevard.
Is that why there's a traffic problem on Berwick Boulevard? Because everybody dumps out there?
Well, I'm not here to say that there is a problem on Berwick Boulevard because I'm not a traffic engineer and I haven't done any studies related to the number of car trips on Berwick Boulevard. But I think people, do perceive it as being a lot of cars on that road, and that's probably the reason is because it is a primary access point for quite a number of households that exist within Berwick.
Yes, Mr. Noel.
Are we familiar with what the speed limit is on Berwick Boulevard?
35.
35, I'm being told.
Any other questions, commissioners? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Yellen. Thank you, Mr. Lotson.
Thank you.
I have several speaker cards. First is Michelle Aycock. I'm sorry. If you would please state your name for the record, and ma'am, you have 3 minutes.
Yes, sir, and thank you to the board for hearing me. As a homeowner and resident of Berwick Plantation, I've lived there for almost 15 years, and I know I've read the initial plan, and but the problem that I'm finding is my concern is the issue with the drainage, because my home abuts Elks Canal, and which, I can't show
What
you.
subdivision is that?
I'm sorry, it's Stone Lake Townhomes. Can you please? I'm sorry. Right. Okay, right here? Okay. Right here, we're talking about, this is Elks Canal, right here. So my question is, the time that I've lived there, that we've had several problems with flooding, since my home is right there, it abuts up on Elks, along with other neighbors, Elks Canal, which if we have a heavy rainfall, as in 07, 09, 2012, 2016, we actually had water coming up into our yards. So my concern is not only traffic, but my main concern is drainage, is once this land is developed, what's the drainage plan for the overflow? Because that whole thing, Elks Canal runs all the way, and this is all overflow. It all runs right here. So you're talking about building this, and here's my house and my neighbors, and all of this floods, even with rain, and I'm telling you, it will come up the canal and into our yards. So that is my concern, is about drainage. And what's going to be the plan, because nowhere have I found has that been addressed. And so that's my main concern, not only traffic, but the drainage. I don't know how it's going to be addressed.
Comments, Mr. Lotson? Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Any questions of Ms.
Aycock? Yes, Aycock.
Any questions? Yes. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
I have a speaker card for Ross Hughes. If you would, sir, please state your name for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Russ Hughes. I'm the president of the Stone Lake Townhomes HOA. And addressing some of the concerns, our homeowners association, we just found out about this just a few weeks ago. We haven't seen any plans. If you look up congregate care, it covers a variety of things, including juvenile detention. So we want to know for sure what the heck is going to be built there. As for traffic, if any of these guys that want to build there want to drive up and down Berwick between, say, 6:30 and 9 in the morning, or 4 to 6 in the evening, you'll see what kind of traffic study needs to be done. I'm opposed to this. I like it residential. I don't care to have my neighbor's property value lowered because of this building butting up against their property. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any questions? Mr. Hughes, I have another card for a Kathleen Andrews. Ms. Andrews, you have 3 minutes.
I'm Kathleen Andrews. I'm a resident of Stone Lakes Townhomes as well. And, you know, I did have some concerns with the proposed zoning change. One of them, yes, it was already brought up, was traffic. I heard somebody say, no, congregate living would not create that much additional traffic, but you would have administrative staff, nurses, aides, physicians, housekeeping, janitorial, grounds, security, deliveries, emergency services, and congregate care operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's 3 shifts. That's a lot of traffic going to be added to the area. The other thing that concerned me was the fact that other than the front of the property that faces Berwick, the rest of the bordering areas, it all borders residential, except for that small portion that you see, which is about 90% of the property line, other than, again, Berwick. Everything there on the surrounding properties is residential. I know this property currently is not zoned residential. I understand that. But my understanding it is the petition now is even to downgrade that to a lower classification, which I think would be very incongruous with the rest of the established community around it.
You have less than a minute.
7 minutes? Okay. I'll be really very quick then. And then to repeat what Michelle said, that canal, Elks Canal, is part of the Ogeechee River watershed. We do have a problem already in heavy rain events, and with the additional overflow of rainwater from roofs, sidewalks, roadways, parking lots, I'm very concerned what's going to happen with our properties in those situations.
Thank you, Ms. Andrews. Any questions of Ms. Andrews? Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
I have a speaker card for a Ron Pastorik. Is that correct? If you would, sir, please state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Ron Pastorik. I'm a member of the Stonebridge HOA. I really don't have a presentation, but if I have a question about drainage from our development, Stonebridge, which is on top of that, down to their development, who should I be dealing with? Should I be bringing it up to the MPC or should I deal with the development group?
Mr. Latson.
We'll go with you guys. Okay, I just wanted to know who we deal with because there might be some issues there.
The applicant does have an engineer on staff that can address those stormwater questions that Mr. Pasternak brought up.
Good. Okay, do you? Good. Thank you.
I do not have any additional speaker cards. Mr. Yellen, anything further from you with respect to your engineer?
And I may reserve a little bit of time if you have questions for the engineer. Someone did mention drainage. Ryan Smith, our engineer, is here. I do want to mention that we have an existing pond right here. It will be used for stormwater. And as I just eyeball it, I suspect that this pond is every bit the size of her pond, maybe even a little bit larger. We're prepared to widen it, deepen it, whatever we have to do to pass code for drainage. A gentleman said that congregant care could be a juvenile detention center, and that's absolutely not true. Our master plan specifically says congregant care independent living, assisted living, memory care. There is nothing in this amendment that would allow anything other than those three uses. The same gentleman said he would like to see residential developed there. It's not residential now. It's currently zoned for a church or for a school. And if it were to be rezoned to residential, there'd be even more traffic and probably more drainage issues than what we're proposing to put there as well. So I hope we've responded to your concerns, but as I've mentioned before, I do have Reverend Carter here, Mr. Falligan here, Mr. Ryan Smith, and Thomas Hutton, all of whom can answer any further questions y'all may have.
Any further questions of
thank
Mr.
you.
Yellen, commissioners? There being none. Anything further, Mr. Lotson? There being none,
Thank you.
the chair will entertain a motion.
Move to approve staff recommendation.
It's been properly moved and second to approve staff recommendation. Any discussion? Any unreadiness? We are ready to vote. Motion carries. Next item on our agenda is item number 10, zoning text amendment. Mr. Lotson.
Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned in the pre-meeting, items 10 and 11 are related. They are both a text amendment, a proposed text amendment to the zoning ordinance, as well as a map amendment. The text amendment as proposed is to create a plan unit development known as Savannah Harbor Parcel 5 Plan Unit Development. The petitioner is requesting to amend the zoning ordinance to do that, and which would be a revision of the original Savannah Harbor Master Plan. The Savannah Harbor Parcel 5 PUD, the subject property is 27.4 acres on the north side of River Street, of the Savannah River, rather, on Hutchinson Island. I'm going to. For the sake of some context, I'm going to open up a couple of exhibits here to do that. This is a vicinity map showing the darkened area, parcel 5 on Hutchinson Island. The tax map shows it's actually made up of two parcels, the primary parcel here and an additional piece of land here. These properties, if this goes under development, would be recombined into a single parcel. This is an aerial map of the subject property. You can see the existing marine slip here. The Westin Hotel and Trading Convention Center are in this area. And this is a zoning map that shows the property is currently zoned PUDBW. That's a waterfront business designation that was established in 1988, believe it or not, with the Savannah Harbor Master Plan. The original master plan was adopted. Currently, the area within the master plan boundaries include a residential development known as the Reserve, which is north of here. the club at Savannah Harbor, which is a golf and tennis facility, and the Trade Center and Convention Center and Westin Hotel that I showed you moments ago. There are also areas designated for future residential and retail and office use. What the petitioner is proposing is a revision or a new master plan for Parcel 5. This is the proposed plan. The PUD text, which I'll also go into as I talk about these two petitions in conjunction, are here. This shows the slip, as I mentioned. This is proposed to be developed as a marina. Some of that work is underway, as we talked about earlier. The petitioner is proposing that the first phase of this development include the 3 blocks that are most westerly on this map, as well as the proposed lawn or common area in the center, the green area. We did, pursuant to the regulations of the zoning ordinance, notify adjacent property owners. We have not had significant response. There's very few residential property owners out here, as you all know, who are normally the people who would respond and ask questions of a development of this type. There are a number of things that I know the board is going to want to discuss as it relates to the text of the proposed text that the applicant is recommending. We had a conversation, the applicant, myself, several members of city staff met regarding some of the issues that are being proposed. This is an example of the street sections that we discussed in the pre-meeting that the petitioners are proposing. These would include both the main entry boulevard shown here, which would be two-way full motion access in and out of the property, as well as the internal streets shown here. So this includes on the entry boulevard a 15-foot sidewalk, a tree lawn, 2 travel lanes, and a median. The internal streets include 10-foot sidewalk, a tree lawn, currently proposed 7.5-foot parking on-street parking lane, and 10-foot travel lanes. In our meeting with the city's traffic engineering department, they were concerned about the 7.5 feet and are recommending 8 feet. We understand that the petitioner will continue to have to work with traffic engineering regarding the specific developments that come into this master plan if it is adopted. Also, we made that a condition of our recommendation that the street sections be approved by the city of Savannah. As it relates to the text, there are a couple of issues that I'd like the applicant to discuss with the board today. One of those issues is the parking and how they are proposing the development be parked. I should mention to you all that a lot of what you see within this text is very similar in nature to the Eastern Wharf project, formerly known as Savannah River Landing. Some of the details of this were mirrored from that development, which is currently under construction. One of the things that I want to bring up to you is the use of on-street parking as proposed in this text. The petitioner is proposing that a number of uses that you'll find on page 4 of the text amendment zoning report be permitted to provide up to 100% of their parking on street. Staff sort of concern with that I want to bring up today is really related to how you manage that. Because we've had this experience in the mid-city neighborhood where for many years now, on-street parking has been allowed to be calculated toward parking requirements. But the question becomes over time, how do you really count those spaces? You know, how many people are, quote, double dipping and triple dipping, and triple dipping is not a real phrase, but I get the point though. But they're proposing that food stores and drugstores, personal service shops, craft shops, and home furnishing shops, and a number of other uses be permitted to provide their parking requirement either with on street or with valet. And the theory of that just brings up some questions I think that need to be discussed here today. They're also proposing with other uses such as banks and offices that they be allowed to establish up to 50% of their requirement, with on street. So those are the kinds of things that I'd like them to detail for us, so that we can talk through those things. Also, they're proposing technically less density that is currently permitted under the current zoning classification. In terms of density, 70 units per acre is permitted, which is pretty comparable to most of downtown and the places where density is a factor. They're proposing 60 dwelling units per acre for all the residential units. However, the way it's supposed to be calculated is that it doesn't apply individually to a developable block. In other words, the entire area of the master plan has to meet that number, which allows the developer to sort of move the density to the places where they need to. Some places can be more dense, other places can be less dense, but overall they have to meet the 60 dwelling units per acre, I should say. They're proposing a maximum of 940 dwelling units. We understand that this development is likely to include not just residential uses, but lodging uses, restaurant uses, other business uses in office. The portion in this area would be the first phase. And I should mention for the record, as I did in the pre-meeting, relative to the parking concerns, there are a number of things that the applicant has proposed as remedies if there become issues related to parking. They also own the property immediately across Resort Drive. This property is accessed by Wayne Shackelford, which is just off here that turns into Resort Drive here. Property on the north side is also owned by the applicant. All in all, staff is supportive of the amended master plan as well as the PUD text. I would like to lay those items discussed on the table for further discussion today. We did provide a series of conditions on our report that are related to the recommendation for approval. Those include that the sort of standard boilerplate ones that any zoning regulation not addressed by the PUD or master plan comply with the City of Savannah zoning ordinance, that the street cross sections be approved by the City of Savannah, and that a master signage plan be approved as well prior to development on the property. But with that, I think I'll just open it up to questions at this point. We are recommending approval for both items with the conditions that I've outlined, the text to create the Savannah Harbor Parcel 5 PUD, and the map amendment to change the zoning to that designation.
Questions of Mr. Lotson? Yes, Ms. Jarrett.
As far as the density goes, I understood you to say that they want the density to apply to the entire parcel. I'm assuming they're going to sell off the parcels bit by bit.
Yes, that's
so
correct.
First come, first served. The first people in are going to get all the density, and by the time we get to the end, there'll be little to no density left.
Well, it's kind of hard to say how that will shake out. I know that when you think about density, you have to think about the other things that control density as well. You have to think about required parking. You have to think about height, and what is really reasonable in terms of what the market will call for in terms of a development. I mean, you don't imagine that the first developer is going to come in and build all 940 units that they're allowed to have, but there is some, and I think the applicant will talk about this, is the other uses that are proposed here in terms of office and retail will take up some of the space on this property, and it won't all be residential.
But when we talk about the required parking, what you're saying is that they want to put a lot of that required parking on the street in a 7.5 foot wide space.
Well, I wouldn't say a lot. I would say that they're asking that the parking, where on-street parking is going to exist, it be permitted to count towards some of the non-residential uses that will be the primary users of the on-street. The residential users will not be the primary users of the on-street. They'll be on site within those blocks that you see in terms of structured parking and off-street parking.
Okay, one more thing. We
Mhm.
talked about tree lawns and sidewalk widths, and you said 15-foot sidewalks and 10-foot sidewalks, but the space for the tree lawn and the sidewalk shows is 10 feet in one and 15 feet in the other.
Yes,
So,
the entry boulevard, which is the main drag that comes into the development, is a wider cross section than the internal streets. So the entry boulevard will have a wider profile
as far
than
as
the
the tree
internal
lawns
streets.
go, are we talking about tree boxes?
I think the applicant has indicated to me that there'll be a combination of tree lawns and tree wells throughout the development. A lot of things go into that location of utilities and things of that nature on where you can establish tree lawns, and in some places you'll need to establish tree wells.
Okay, my concern about bicycles still stands. I'm concerned about mixing bicycles and pedestrians on a sidewalk that is too narrow for that. And if they have a minimum of a 10-foot wide sidewalk, we're okay.
Mhm.
But when they start putting in tree lawns, you're reducing the size of the sidewalk. So,
And I think the intent would be for bicycle traffic to take place with the vehicle traffic, not on the sidewalk.
fix it on the sidewalk.
Mhm. Yes, ma'am.
Any additional questions, Mr. Lotson? Is the petitioner present? Thank you, Mr. Lotson. If you would, sir, please step forward and state your name for the record.
Afternoon. My name is Rusty Ross, and I'm here as the agent for the petitioner, KBCB Development, which is John Kay and Ray Michaels, who are sitting behind me here as the primary developers of this project. They, as well as Ryan Smith and Ryan Thompson from Thompson Hutton, are here as well to answer any of those specific questions you might have, particularly about the parking and the width of the road and usage and that sort of thing. This is an exciting new opportunity for Savannah. It's a broadening of an area that is not, while part of our historic district, is going to be developed in accordance with those sorts of requirements. The plans that are in progress are vital. They're new. They reflect the age that we're in today, which is thus one reason why we're requesting a text amendment from the 1988 PUD zone to a new zone that encompasses and develops this 27 acres as a unified body. Now, the various uses, the mixed uses we'll own here, will basically establish this island as a community as part of Savannah. And unfortunately, that hasn't happened yet, as we've waited for years and years and years for this island area to develop. It's a massive opportunity within the confines of the city of Savannah. In fact, if you look at this property compared to the historic district, it takes up almost a quarter or 20% if you were to compare it to a corner of the historic district just below it in the northeast corner of Savannah. But with that, I'm just going to ask if you have any questions, I can answer them, or the folks from Thompson Hutton, or Ray Michael, or John Kay.
Questions of Mr. Ross? There being none. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And you're the only speaker card I have, so you've spoken.
I did. I don't know, did Mr. Michael, would you like to get up and say one word?
It's fine.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, commissioners. My name is Ray Michaels, and I, together with John Kay, are the sponsors of this PUD project. In the beginning, John now recognized the importance of this project to Hutchinson Island's future and to the downtown expansion district. To that extent, we engaged national, regional, and local consultants to help us vet this project in a very serious meaningful manner. And the goal was to create a quality mixed-use waterfront, walkable, boatable community. One of the big issues that I'm sure you're aware of on Hutchinson Island, we deal with different soils and different issues relative to foundations and pilings. So it really took a lot of effort to come up with a plan that accomplished two significant goals for John Kay. In the public realm, he wanted to make sure the public realm was considered first, and then we would figure out how we put the buildings and how we organize the parking and how we organize the streets. And the significant public realm space is we've been successful in expanding the old slip one, as it shows on that map, to accommodate a historic marina. And we've actually gotten a grant from the Georgia Department of Natural Resources and the federal government to assist us in creating the boating, docking, et cetera, as well as we've gotten state money from the county to help us in the bulkhead work. And I challenge y'all to drive out there and take a look at it, because it really is going to be a value add to the city. The second most important piece for me, having been coming to Savannah for quite some time, is we have no buildings per se on the river. Savannah doesn't have a real river park. That's 1,100 feet on the Savannah River. It has no buildings pulled up to the river's edge and set back substantially so the river can be enjoyed by the public, and it winds its way through the whole development. And it's a great linear park and a great green space that doesn't exist on the river in Savannah today. The other thing that we wanted to do on this PUD ordinance was take some of the old uses that are permitted. In other words, we can do everything within the existing ordinance, but there are uses in the old ordinance that we want to discard and get rid of so we can set a higher standard for what hopefully will be the continued development along the Savannah River on the north side of the river. Parking. We've raised the issues on parking. We had discussion maybe 2 years ago with your parking department here, and it was suggested, and we welcomed it, and we engaged Nelson Nygaard to do a parking study for us to help us gauge the parking demand so we could balance it between market demands and creating this kind of urban mixed-use walkable neighborhood that we want to do. And as you well see, we're sort of an isolated piece on the river. We're not in the area where there's going to be a lot of traffic and a lot of parking that you wouldn't plan for. The parking that we have is substantially covered underneath the footprints of the buildings. It's not on the streets. All the parking will be measured against the requirements on the schedule that I think is in our PUD ordinance, because not only do we have to comply with the parking requirements, but we have to meet the market. And we have been involved in 19 projects in urban communities all over the southeast United States, and we have found that the parking that Nelson Nygaard came to, which is fairly similar to the existing, and Marcus, am I correct, fairly similar to the parking requirements on zoning. So we haven't deviated in a expansive way. We've kept fairly close, but we're trying to, again, create getting people out of cars, walking, using the boating experience, public transportation, and things that looking forward to the future, not looking to where we've been in the past. And also on density, we're less dense. But what was important is, and I want to address your question, Mr. Garrett, the density of the uses is not going to be all of a sudden we got it all on one parcel and then we go over and this parcel has 2 units. First of all, the reason for the density requirements and the way we organize these parcels is because of the deep foundations and deep pilings, we have to marry coming up with parking, then various components. We may have retail on a ground level, such as on the marina, and then we'll have residential above it. And those parkings have been, and size of parcels have been gauged to accommodate the uses and densities for a program that is truly a mirror of Savannah in terms of hospitality, retail, office, residential, for sale condo. This property cannot support single-family homes. I think we've seen that at the reserve. Pilings are so expensive that single-family homes cannot afford deep 70-foot pilings and the foundations required. So I just want to say that we have worked diligently over the last 4 years and patiently to bring forth something that I know John Kay values for this community, as I do. There will be something that we think will be a signature development, not unlike what Eastern Wharf has done for the community and what Kessel has done up the street. I think we sort of the three cornerstones of new development. I think we're committed to doing it in a quality way. And having said that, we appreciate the staff. We have collaborated with the staff through Thomas and Hutton and Rusty Ross to make sure that everything we put forth speaks to what we hope you want in the future. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.
And I'll answer any other questions.
Any questions?
I have
Yes,
a
Ms.
question.
Sutters.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you plan to comply with what the traffic engineer has said about the roads being 60 feet as a minimum, 8 feet, and I know your plans show 7.5 for parking on those
Yeah,
terms.
I was on the conference call last week, and we will do the 8-foot parking lanes. In terms of the width of the streets, I want to study that a little bit further, and here's why. And we'll comply with the traffic engineer's final decision is. Since our property doesn't really go anywhere when you enter it, again, I really want to focus on a place that you want to live and walk rather than getting your car going somewhere. So that was the reason we tried to come up with these street sections, and I think we'll see the value of it. And as somebody told me when I started this plan, they said, well, if we had to utilize some of the existing zoning requirements and street requirements in Savannah, Oglethorpe has never been able to build the historic district. So we really want to recognize that we're sort of up to ourselves over here and create something that people would prefer to walk in, spend time in the park, go down to the marina and do things rather than driving in and around it, having huge traffic issues, which I don't think we'll have.
And I have a second question. In engineering the marina basin, are you looking into the flushing action so that you don't get spoil material caught up in that area, similar to what has happened at Harbor Town?
Yes, ma'am.
Just to put that out there to you, I worked on both the team with Harbor Town
We
and
hired, listen, we hired a company called Applied Technology Management in the beginning. Their history, they've done 700 marinas worldwide. They did first learn on Harbor Town, so it was a lesson learned. So we're addressing those issues as we develop. And just so you know, this project at this point we're not doing this to just get the zoning. We are in an agreement under contract. We're in a term sheet with what will initially be $100 million first phase development. Thomas and Hutton will be doing the civil engineering, and we hope to break ground on this February next year. So it's not just to get it zoned. We are actively moving forward the development of this piece of real estate.
Mr. Noda, I see you.
You do, and I don't know if it's for staff or the petitioner, but I am very concerned with the roadways. I mean, just the emergency equipment. I see on the internal streets that some of the widths are less than 50. They're 48 and a half. And I'm not so sure with that small of a development getting emergency equipment in and out. And I know that I'm sure staff has looked at it. Has a traffic study been done on that specific internal street? See, the entry boulevard looks sufficient. I mean, you've got 11-foot lanes.
May I address that, sir? And appreciate the question. In our conference, is that correct?
Mr. Lasson, you having a little problem?
No, what is going on?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That's probably a good idea.
But I just wanted to add for the record that we had that exact conversation in a meeting that was held with myself, the petitioners, representatives, and the fire marshal.
Okay.
There are some issues that they want the petitioners to address. What will happen, however, though, is if this process goes forward, when the development processes go forward for individual projects, street lane widths, additional widths that might be required for things like outriggers on the large trucks, as I understand
that's my concern.
will be required. And they've had that discussion with the fire department. I think also that think the best way to put this is that as individual projects get reviewed for this, then those kinds of questions and answers will have to be addressed for them to get the approvals, because they are in the review process.
in the general development.
Yes.
And I'm familiar with that. My concern is if we approve this text amendment or zoning, then will they need to go back and get a less stringent or more stringent, less stringent.
No, I follow you. Yep.
You know,
One of the conditions is that these street sections be approved prior to the zoning
that's
approval.
all I need to hear.
Okay.
We've addressed that right now in our detailed planning, and we respect her request, and we're going to honor it.
Okay. Ms. Jarrett.
I think my question is probably for staff as well. How does this compare to the previously approved master plan as far as density, et cetera, et cetera?
Relative to density, the current zoning permits 70 units per acre.
Okay.
So technically, this is less units per acre than the current zoning.
Okay. And how does it fit into our comprehensive plan?
It fits into the comprehensive plan because this area and a lot of area on the north side here is designated as downtown expansion. We believe this is an appropriate use of that category and fits into the requirements for downtown expansion.
Thank you, Mr. Lotson. Anything further, Mr. Lotson?
No, sir.
Anything further, Mr. Ross? I think we covered it, but
I think we covered it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, I will entertain a motion.
I move that we approve the staff recommendation.
Second.
Properly moved and second. Any discussion? Any unreadiness? We're ready for the vote. This is on item number 10 that we're voting on.
Okay, and then map. So do you need another motion for the second?
Yes. It has been motion carried. I need another one for.
I move we accept staff's recommendation on item 11.
Been properly moved and second by Mr. Cole. Any discussion? Any unreadiness? We're ready to vote. Motion carries. Item number 12, Mr. Lonestetter.
Yes, thank you. And if it's okay with the board, I think I'd like to present both the rezoning and the tower at one time, because they are so related to one another, but you will have to make separate motions for each. So that's okay, I'll go ahead and do that. Okay, so first I'll go through the requested rezoning. Petitioner is requesting to rezone a 0.13 acre parcel. It's actually 0.13 acre portion of a larger parcel, which is about 56 acres in size, within the county from an existing RA designation, which stands for residential agriculture, to a residential agricultural RAWT overlay, which stands for residential agricultural and wireless communication digital television tower overlay. So it's not a rezoning request for the base zoning district, it's actually an overlay district which would be placed on top of the existing RA. The purpose of the rezoning is to permit the construction of a non-concealed freestanding wireless facility. Subject property is located on or just off of Louisiana Avenue near the intersection with North Carolina Avenue, near the Avondale neighborhood. The 0.13 acre portion of the subject parcel is undeveloped, but does contain significant vegetation, as you can see in this aerial map. There are some wetlands to the east of the subject site, but the subject site itself is not part of a flood zone or wetland area. The residential properties just to the west are located in the city of Savannah. The county line approximately follows this street here. So the intent of the WT overlay district is to permit the development in rural areas of a single commercial wireless telecommunications tower or a digital television tower where there are large tracts of undeveloped RA land. So the WT overlay district was specifically designed and intended to be placed over existing residential agricultural land. The allowed uses for this parcel would be the same as those permitted in the existing RA, but would also allow one wireless telecommunications facility to be developed. The rezoning will not impact the adjacent RA designated land. So I'm going to pull up the tower survey here. This shows the lease parcel that is being proposed for a T-Mobile wireless tower, a monopole tower. It will be accessed off of Louisiana Avenue via a 25-foot access easement and a 40-foot right-of-way and a 25-foot wide paved road. So we do recommend approval of the rezoning request to the WT overlay. I'm going to get into the actual tower details right now. Are there any questions regarding just the rezoning portion of this? Okay, so wireless towers are regulated under Section 16 of the county ordinance. That's Wireless Telecommunications Facilities Ordinance. The petitioners are proposing a 145-foot tall monopole wireless tower on that 0.13 acre site. And approval of the tower would be contingent upon approval of the rezoning request as well by the county commission. Some of the submittal requirements for a wireless tower are contained in section 16.5. One of these requirements is what's called a evidence of need report, which overviews the coverage as well as the capacity of the network. I'll briefly explain what was provided by the petitioner. So this polygon here represents the area where there's a current tower, where there is not enough capacity to handle the amount of users in this area. So the proposed tower, which will be here, you can see will provide additional capacity to this area here where a lot of these users are having dropped calls, unfortunately, and aren't able to get through. So the coverage map here and the analysis was reviewed by our third-party consultant, which is Cityscape, and they determined that the proposed tower does meet the threshold of justification for a new tower. Another submittal requirement is the site plan. This is similar to the one which I showed you previously. It's a little bit more detailed. It shows the location of the tower as well as the generator and the equipment cabinet. Now, one of the requirements of a new tower is a landscape plan. The ordinance requires a 15-foot wide buffer with a row of evergreens, 6 feet tall and an 80% opacity. The Planning Commission does have the ability to waive this requirement if it's deemed appropriate to use existing vegetation. So we do recommend approval of granting a waiver here just because the existing site is located within a pretty heavily vegetated area, and the addition of very small trees would not really do much in terms of providing additional screening. We do recommend, however, that if this area between the tower site and the road is developed, that the site will have to be brought into conformance with the landscaping requirements. So we do say that we'd like to add that as a condition of the approval if you do decide to do so. Another requirement of the WTF ordinance is that a WTF plan, which stands for Wireless Telecommunications Facilities Plan, be provided. This is shown here. And as you can see, there are 5 co-location requirements, or 5 co-location sites that are provided on the tower, which meets the ordinance standards. One other requirement is the visual impact analysis, which shows photo simulations of what the tower will look like from various vantage points. This is included in your packet. You can see the tower there. There's one down here from Louisiana Avenue that I think, there. You can see the tower peaking up above the peak there. We do want to note that one of the requirements of the wireless telecommunications ordinance is that, if possible, the design of the tower be flush mounted. However, there is a waiver statute in there that says if the flush mounted design cannot be accommodated, and if there's an RF engineer letter that states that the coverage will not be there with a non-flush mounted design, that the Planning Commission can waive that requirement. The petitioner has provided a letter stating that a flush mounted design in this capacity is not possible, that the coverage issue will not be resolved with a flush mounted design. So we do support the waiver for the flush mounted design as well. An additional standard is that if you look at the setback, there's a requirement that the tower be set back 100 feet from residential districts. If you can see, the tower, because the tower site is the only portion that's proposed to be rezoned, it will actually be surrounded by RA, residential agricultural zoning. So it will be less than 100 feet from the boundary of an RA district. However, because there's nothing developed in this area, the 100-foot waiver or setback waiver is warranted here, and staff is in support of that as well. There's been a third-party review by our cityscape consultants. They do recommend approval with a number of conditions that are outlined in your review. In summary, though, we do recommend approval of both the rezoning and the wireless tower application with the conditions that are outlined in your review, as well as the conditions that are outlined in the cityscape report, as well as approval of the setback waiver and the landscape waiver. Be happy to answer any questions you have.
Mr. Dole, followed by Ms. Parker.
Some are minor. You stated a paved road. It says gravel on the plan. Also, if you go to the, I'm trying to see which map this is. Exhibit B, NWC Tower Site Plan.
Yeah.
Right there. Look to the bottom of the tower area. It says R1 zoning, RA zoning. What does that line indicate?
Well, that's actually incorrect. This is all RA zoning.
That's what I want to make sure.
R1 zoning is up here within the city, but RA in the county, it's all RA.
I just want to make sure there wasn't any R1 out there.
No, we noticed that too, but it doesn't change the overall intent of the plan here.
On a normal petition, we notify owners within 200 feet. This has an effect greater than 200 feet, in my opinion, from owners in the neighborhood. Does that change, or did they meet the requirements is what I'm asking?
We met the requirement. They met the requirements for the label. We actually did extend it a bit.
Okay.
We extended it to this whole area here.
Perfect. And with that, have we had any input from neighbors?
No, sir.
Perfect.
Ms. Parker.
Two questions. One, you mentioned the height being 145.
Yeah.
But they have the ability to go higher, and if so, is that something that...
Well, you would be voting on the 145 feet here presented. I do want to mention something I forgot to mention, is that it will be lit, and it will have tape around it for reflecting purposes.
So if they decided to go higher, they have to come before...
They would have to come before the board again, yep.
Oh.
Any additional questions? Yes, Ms. Parker.
Just one more question. I'm curious. I know that you stated that basically because the neighbors, the phone service is being dropped in this particular area.
Mm-hmm.
So with that in mind, is this something that the towers like this are pretty much spread all over Savannah sporadically because of that same
I can't speak on behalf of whether or not this is a common reason for installing new towers. For this one, I know it's not so much a coverage issue, but that users are losing their phone calls, and it's a capacity issue.
Any additional questions? Petitioner present. If so, sir, please step forward and state your name for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jonathan Yates. This is the first time I've appeared before the board without Mr. Manigo. So please tell him I was here. We go back some 20 years. He always votes for me, but he gives me the devil during the process.
We catch it also.
Okay.
Don't feel special.
First and foremost, with me is my local counsel, Ms. Tracy Mackey, Brennan Wasden. We also have our property owners, Brian Redmond and Chrissy Harrison with the Harrison Family Trust. And we have both a neighbor and someone who operates something very important to me on the property, Peggy Noon of Pegasus Riding Academy. I would be remiss, Ms. Wilson in here, I want to reach out. Matt Lonnerstater was incredible to us during this process. We got so used to Jack Butler, and I said, oh my God, Jack is gone. What do we do now? We got Matt, and I want to thank Matt. This is a little different facility than you've looked at before. What the purpose is today, it's all about the neighbors. The folks in Avondale deserve the same wireless infrastructure that the people throughout the rest of Chatham County have, the people in Fulton County have, the people in Effingham County have, and quite frankly, what we're doing today, when Chatham County or City of Savannah has a road system that's clogged down, traffic is not moving, too much traffic on it, you guys have to go through a very lengthy process to create a new road, get a road funded, and then build it. This is what we're doing today. What we're doing today is adding another lane in the highway to improve the wireless traffic in the area. And wireless traffic comes in all sorts: voice calls, data, and data particularly. What's happening today, the sites are overloaded. We're a victim of our own success. What we really are is we're a victim of the adoption of wireless by the folks in the area. We found in the United States today, and this is where it gets significant, almost 55% of all households have gone wireless only. We saw a particular uptick in the 2008 through 2011 timeframe. What was going on in the country, whether you called it a mini depression, the Great Recession, a lot of folks had to make some tough family decisions to put food on the table. And a lot of folks made the decision that one of the things they were going to cut was their landline telephone. They were going to cut the landline out and go to wireless only. What does that mean to T-Mobile? We have a duty. We have an absolute duty to these folks that their calls will get out. If they're going to call 911, where nationwide is between 80 and 84% of all 911 calls come from a wireless device, that call's got to be there. If they want to use their phone to access the internet, they got to have it. So what we're doing is we're putting in another lane of traffic. Not easy putting in, it's a lot easier for us to put in a lane of traffic than for Chatham County or the City of Savannah, but still not easy. What we look for here, we had to offload certain sectors of existing towers to make the traffic flow again. We look for a piece of property that will work to do this. We found an incredible piece of property. The Harrison property, to give you a little history, we're on a 55-acre piece. There's 5 pieces total for about 160 acres. 1929, Chrissy's grandparents, Clifford and Tilly Robertson, bought the property, moved out there, and started a dairy farm. They operated the dairy farm till 1987. Presently on the property, you have the Robertsons' old house right as you enter. You have a bathroom building. You have a corral, and you have a riding arena with stalls beneath it and a greenhouse. This is where I want to brag a little bit on Peggy Noon, and this is a little personal for me, and I apologize. What Peggy does at Pegasus is therapeutic riding for special needs children. Why I'm getting a little personal, I have an 18-year-old with autism. He was in a similar program in Charleston County, and it meant the world to him. So, Peggy, thank you. All right, I'll get back on track. That was my aside. So what we were able to find was a total tract of 160 acres. I've been in the family for about 90 years. We had this incredible tree cover. Now, again, with capacity, the one good part about capacity is you bring the heights down. It's almost like if I hold a flashlight way above this podium, if I hold it up here, you got a scattered piece of light. If I pull it down closer, the circle gets smaller, but the light gets more intense. So that was the purpose, to provide the capacity, the ability to cover those folks around us in a manner so we can create that extra lane of traffic. My mother told me never to eavesdrop, but I did it earlier today, and I heard part of the review of this site as y'all were in your luncheon meeting. One thing that was brought up by the county manager that I want to stress, and I'm going to give you a little background on this. This site has been reviewed and approved by the FAA. FAA made two important findings: determination of no hazard to air navigation. They also said marking and lighting are not necessary for aviation safety. However, we are going to comply with the Chatham County ordinance that requires taping. We start with reflective taping at 20 feet. It goes up in 10-foot intervals, and we have a day white, night red beacon on top. I didn't invent those rules. The county manager's predecessor, Mr. Abold, a former Marine, when he told me to jump, I asked us how high. So we're going to do that. Safety is all important, both to T-Mobile and to National Wireless. That'll be installed immediately before the tower gets live. I discussed it further with the county manager. The lighting is tied into a central NOC, or National Operations System. I checked with my folks. We will get an alert within 1 minute of a lighting failure. The lights are LED, so they have a very long lifetime. We have a similar facility by the pool of Walmart in close proximity to the airport. We've had no problems there. But if for any reason there's a malfunction, we get alert in 1 minute. I'm going to work with the county manager to have a number I can call immediately to alert the airmen until it's rectified. In order to make this site work, we not only had to go to the FAA, we had to go to Georgia SHPA, the State Historic Preservation Office. They also approved this facility. And then again, before I even talk to Matt, I think you might laugh at me, but I can show you. This site on the Harrison property had to be reviewed by a total of 11 Native American tribes. Any Native American tribe that either lived in or migrated through Chatham County had to review and approve. It was reviewed by the Cashuta Indian tribe, the Tuscarora Nation, the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma, the Muskogee Creek, the United Ketowa Band of Cherokee Indians, the Eastern Shawnee Tribe of Oklahoma, the Alabama Quartzsite Tribal Town, the Thought Local Tribal Town, the Shawnee, the Catawba Indian Nation, and the Porch Band of Creeks. So before Matt realized what he was getting into with me, a lot of work had to be done to get here. Long and the short, Section 16 is one of the longer sections of your ordinance. We went through it all. We worked hard to make sure we can meet it in every way. We designed a facility that has met the approval of Mr. Rick Evers of Cityscape. It will add that extra lane to the highway, but we wanted to do it in the best possible way, and that's where my congratulations are out to the Harrison family, Brian Redmond, Chrissy Harrison. Very rarely in an environment like Savannah, Chatham County, or Charleston County, South Carolina, where I'm from, you get 160 acres in this kind of vegetative state where we can get in there, place the tower behind the existing tree cover. And let's talk about the tower in terms of what it means for the neighborhood. It takes us anywhere from 45 to a maximum of 60 days to build. After that, T-Mobile will come in maybe 6 to 8 times a year for routine maintenance, so we don't create any traffic. We create no noise, no odor, no fumes. What we do create is that extra lane in the highway. As the site itself, we will have 100 by 100 lease area, 65 feet by 65 feet. We're going to have a opaque fence around it. You won't see it because it'll be covered in trees. And I think anything else you have questions on, we're here to answer. We also had the site, our engineer, Georgia professional and Amy R. Hurst certified the facility to the ANSI TIA 222G standards for Chatham County of 106 mile per hour winds with no ice, 30 miles per hour with quarter-inch radial ice, and she certified a fall zone of 40 feet. In case of a catastrophic situation, it would only dangle within 40 feet of its base. So I know that was long. I apologize for the length of the presentation. I apologize for getting a little sidetracked on what Ms. Peggy does, but it means a lot to me personally, what she does. I think we found the solution. There'll be a solution for the neighbors, but I think we found it in the best possible way for the neighbors, and I sincerely hope you agree with me. Thank you.
Questions of Mr. Yates? Yes, Ms. Jarrett.
Yes, Ms. Jarrett.
I appreciate the road analogy, but I did want to point out that when traffic reduces, often we do a road diet and we remove road. Will you remove the tower when it's not needed?
Absolutely, we'll make that a condition of approval. The tower will come down when it's no longer needed. And, as to that thing, I don't know when that diet's going to come into effect with cell tower usage. Used to be flying in out of the Charleston airport. Everyone I'd see had a magazine or a newspaper. They'd be talking to the person next to them. Now everyone's waiting on the plane. They're just looking at their phones. I don't know what they're doing on them, but they're doing something on them. So if you have an ability, Commissioner Jarrett, to put people on a wireless diet, I want to hear about it. But yes, ma'am, we would make it an absolute condition of approval. When it's no longer used for wireless purposes, we would remove at our own expense.
Any additional questions of Mr. Yates? I do have a speaker card for Ms. Mackey if she wishes to speak. If you would please state your name for the record.
I'm so sorry. I just don't have the feel at this point. I think Mr. Gates is very adequately and appropriately covered every concern that I can think of that has been raised since I've been working with Mr. Gates for the past few years.
And if you would kindly state your name for the record. Ma'am, if you would please state your name for the record.
I'm so sorry. Tracy Mackey, I'm with Brennan Ross in Savannah, Georgia.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm. Chair will entertain a motion.
Question.
Yes,
We're
Ms. Coles.
going to add the condition of removal of site. Should that be on item 12 or 13?
Hold on.
That should be on, sorry, I overheard. I would recommend placing that on the last one for the tower itself. Yeah, the rezoning.
Number 11.
Yeah,
Sorry.
whatever the number is for the tower. I don't have my agenda.
13 is the tower.
13, so I'd recommend placing that as part of 13.
We need to do this separately, correct?
Yes, we have to do it separately.
Second.
It's been properly moved by Mr. Cole and second by Mr. Noah. Any? One second. Any discussion?
Yeah, previously in the pre-meeting, we talked about mosquito control and emergency type vehicles. Has everybody okay with what's going on now, or do you still have concerns?
I talked with Mr. Yates, and we're going to not only like the issue of lights, because obviously LED lasts so much longer, but with mosquito control, obviously the FAA is one thing, but then we have our local issues. But I'm going to have our chief pilot contact Mr. Yates, talk about some things, but it's not mosquito control only, as I told Mark, Mr. Revenue, the issues of law enforcement searches, those kind of things. So we feel like they've been addressed, but as it goes to the board, if we see something to come up, that would be a worst case that the board would add conditions. But so far, what he said he would do, I'm fine with. But if we need to tighten it up, it would be done at the commission. But I'm good.
Lee, shall we restrict the height? Because there was a conversation about
the height's
ability to be able
restricted
to
at
go up.
140 something. So if they wanted to come back, I can tell you it would never be approved by the board, by the commissioners. But I'm at this point, from what I understand by the regulations, 140 is topped out. So yeah.
Any further discussion?
But thank you for asking.
Any unreadiness? We're ready to vote. And we're voting on item number 12. Motion carries. Item number 13, Mr.
Make a motion to approve staff's recommendation in addition that such a time power no longer used for cellular use will be removed at the expense of the owner.
Second.
Properly moved by Mr. Cole, second by Mr. Noah. Any discussion? Any unreadiness? We're ready to vote. Motion carries. There are no presentations. There are no other business. As such, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion. Second.
Stand adjourned.